Thank you.
And if he wants to have a dividing line in politics on this type of stuff, then I'll happily be on the other side of the argument from Russell Findlay and all of the cohorts that he's courting in his question today. I want to make sure that there is a replacement prison so that those who are sentenced to prison can be held safely and securely, and that staff are safe and secure in undertaking their responsibilities. That is my duty as First Minister, and that is what the Government will concentrate on delivering.
Absolutely. Russell Findlay.
The cohort that I'm talking to are hard-working Scots, and it's taxpayers who want every single pound to be spent on the best possible schools and hospitals, not the best possible prisons. And this is baffling to people in the real world. They expect the government to build functional prisons at a sensible price and to be kept safe from dangerous criminals, but they're getting neither from the SNP. Because of their failure to build prisons on time and within budget, the SNP will release thousands of criminals before they've done their time. Police Scotland officers and victims groups say this will result in more crime in Scotland's streets. £1 billion and more crime. Does that really sound like a good deal to John Swinney?
First Minister.
This project is different to the one that was originally discussed about a decade ago, because in the original proposition it was based on estimates of a 700-place prison, and this will in fact be a prison that will accommodate over 1,340 prisoners, so it is almost double the size of the prison. Now, when we've looked at the comparative costs, we've looked, and the Scottish Prison Service has done this, has looked at the recent report by the National Audit Office, which shows that cost per prison place has increased by up to 259% between the initial business case and the expected costs in England and Wales. The price per place has risen to between £610,000 and £840,000 in England and Wales. The price per place for His Majesty's Prison Glasgow sits in the middle of this range at £740,000. Now, Mr Findlay can say all the things that he wants, and he can play to all of the sentiments he's very visibly playing to. But as First Minister of Scotland, I will expect my ministers to take rational decisions to protect the public purse and to protect the public by ensuring that those who are sentenced to prison can be accommodated. And I will not play games with the type of rhetoric that Mr Findlay puts to Parliament today.
Russell Findlay.
So he's protecting the public purse. The prison apparently is doubled in size, but it's 10 times the cost. That's SNP economics right there. They're squandering more on a 5-star prison than they spent in Scotland's flagship Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, and they're releasing thousands of prisoners early. But at the same time, they're building a prison with boxes for bats and bricks for birds. And this illustrates how detached the Holyrood bubble has become from the real world, and it's why so many people are disillusioned with politics. This John Swinney government is neglecting what really matters to people. So as a matter of urgency, will he commit to cutting these outrageous costs, or will he just expect taxpayers to pipe down and pay up?
First Minister.
All of us can see what Mr Findlay is up to today. All of us can see it. It's very, very visible.
Let's hear one another.
It's very visible what Mr Findlay is up to today. He is absolutely terrified of his party being consumed by reform, as all the polls suggest, and he's playing into their hands with every bit of obnoxious rhetoric that he comes out with today.
Thank you.
So I will reassure taxpayers, as they have, well, Mr Findlay,
let's hear the First Minister.
Mr Findlay hasn't balanced a single budget in his life in the public finances. I've balanced 10 budgets in this country and delivered value for money, and I will continue to do so. So I encourage Mr Findlay to go away and do his research, because I've set out to Parliament today the issues that have arisen because of significant inflation in the construction costs with which we are wrestling. Why are we wrestling with these costs? We're wrestling with these costs because of the fiscal mismanagement of the Conservatives, the Liz Truss budget, the higher interest rates that she bequeathed on us all, and Mr Findlay was right behind the mess that she created.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today, the UK Government has announced plans to speed up the development of new nuclear power. It's obvious that this plan has the potential to bring billions of investment to communities, jumpstart growth and create high-skilled jobs, all while ending our reliance on dictators like Putin to meet our energy demands. So will John Swinney end the Scottish Government's ideological block on nuclear energy to ensure Scots can also benefit from this opportunity?
First Minister.
Very muted.
I think the best thing we can do is to power on with our plans for renewable energy development and to make sure that Scotland can realise the extraordinary natural resources that we have, which I saw being developed at the Methyl Yard yesterday in Fife, which was a collaboration between the United Kingdom Government and the Scottish Government in securing the investment from Navantia and the securing of the future of the workforce at Methyl. I think we should power on with renewables, and that should be the clear policy signal from the Scottish Government.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, it's not an either-or. The National Grid's live data at 10 o'clock this morning showed 23.9% of the electricity being consumed in Scotland was from nuclear. The transition to net zero is a chance to create decent, high-skilled jobs for the future, to drive investment into Scotland and to secure our national energy security. Just ask communities in East Lothian or North Ayrshire who have seen the benefits. But for almost 20 years, the SNP have vetoed nuclear energy projects in Scotland, leaving jobs, growth and skills to go elsewhere. But the next generation of small nuclear reactors could revolutionise our energy market. China is constructing 29 reactors and the EU has 12 at planning stage. That's a huge advantage in the global race to harness new technologies to deliver cleaner, affordable, independent energy. So why is John Swinney determined to let Scotland fall behind?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I spend a lot of my time, as I did on Tuesday, engaged with the Scottish Energy Advisory Board and with other renewable energy and other energy interests in Scotland. And one of the pleas that the Energy Advisory Board were making to me, which I acknowledge is important and which I faithfully try to deliver, is absolute policy certainty, so that investors can invest in the technologies that come forward. Now, Scotland is already, in 2023, 70% of electricity generated in Scotland was from renewable sources, and that's before we have, and that's a marked increase compared to 32% in 2013. So Mr Sarwar should be careful not to create the impression that renewable energy is not delivering formidably for Scotland, because it is. And I think investors will be really worried by the language from Mr Sarwar today, because investors tell me that they know exactly where the Scottish Government stands today. We are right behind the renewable energy revolution, and we're delivering that. And Mr Sarwar, in his pursuit of the new direction, wants to muddy the waters. He wants to add uncertainty. He wants to scare off investment from the renewable energy industry. I won't be doing that. I'll be giving a clear green light to the green energy revolution in Scotland, and I'll be proud of what Scotland can deliver.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, I'm talking about more investment in Scotland. John Swinney has the power to unleash billions of pounds of investment and new jobs with the stroke of a pen. But instead, he is trapped in the politics of the 1970s, wanting thousands of jobs.
Let's hear Mr Sarwar.
He wants thousands of jobs and billions in investment to go to England and Wales rather than come to Scotland, all while weakening Scotland's energy security. What kind of nationalist is he, Providing Officer? So let me set out a new direction that a Scottish Labour Government will take. We will end the ideological block to zero-carbon nuclear energy. We will kick-start economic growth and bring billions of investment into Scotland. We will deliver thousands of high-skilled, well-paid jobs for the future and boost Scotland's energy security, all while delivering on Scotland's ambitious climate change commitments. In the face of this huge opportunity, why are John Swinney and the SNP holding Scotland back?
First Minister.
I don't think that's in any way, shape or form in any way correct, because what we're doing is that Deputy First Minister and I spent an evening last night with a number of investors who are investing with the support of the Scottish National Investment Bank in the renewables energy revolution in Scotland. In my friend Mr Gibson's constituency in North Ayrshire, we have just secured significant investment, Mr Sarwar mentioned North Ayrshire, significant investment by XLCC in cable manufacturing, which will be absolutely critical for offshore renewables, in addition to the investment we've landed at Sumitomo at NIG, which will assist in that activity as well. I would encourage Mr Sarwar to go away and look at the cost issues in relation to nuclear power, because if he thinks that the increase in costs in relation to HMP Barlinnie is one thing, his eyes will water when he sees the increase in costs in nuclear plants that are taking their course in England. So, given the question that Mr Sarwar has put to me, and given the primacy I attach to policy certainty, let me use this opportunity to make it absolutely crystal clear. The Scottish Government will continue with our support for the development of green renewables in Scotland, and we will not give the green light to nuclear power stations in Scotland.
Question number 3, Lorna Slater.
Rents across Scotland are skyrocketing. Tenants are paying the price while private landlords are lining their pockets. And whilst the upcoming housing bill finally promises permanent rent controls to fix this system, these won't come into force until 2027. Right now, tenants are protected by temporary controls introduced whilst the Greens were in government. But these protections are set to expire in just 2 months, exposing tenants to extortionate rent increases. And despite having the powers to extend these protections, the Scottish Government has pledged not to. First Minister, will you do the right thing to protect tenants and ensure these temporary protections are extended until permanent rent controls are in place?
Always through the Chair. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, obviously I understand the significance of the point that Lorna Slater puts to me, and the temporary changes to rent adjudication come to an end on the 31st of March, and the arrangements will revert back to the existing legal requirements, which are based on market rent. Now, I'm aware of the concerns that have been raised. We know that there is a longer-term approach required on rental policy, which is why the Government is bringing forward the Housing Scotland Act to support the introduction of longer-term rent controls where this is needed and justifiable. And the Government will focus on making sure we get that legislation correct and bring that through Parliament.
Lorna Slater.
Minister, the cost of living crisis for tenants hasn't gone away. Over the last 10 years, monthly rent for a 2-bedroom flat in Edinburgh has more than doubled. Some tenants are already reporting spending more than 70% of their income on rent. We agree the need for permanent rent controls in the housing bill. But this Government's decision to scrap vital bridging rent controls will give landlords free rein to hike rents for 2 years. It is absolutely no surprise that the Association of Landlords has called it, to quote, a very welcome announcement. What does the First Minister have to say to renters who will be facing this cliff edge in just a few weeks' time?
First Minister.
So what I would say is that most private tenants still have a right to seek a review of a rent increase if they consider it too high. And I would, of course, encourage tenants who are concerned about a rent increase to apply for a review. Now, in relation to other messages that I would share with tenants, I would indicate that the Government is investing over £90 million in discretionary housing payments, which is an increase of £6 million on 23-24, which of course has been facilitated by the support, the welcome support, which I appreciate from the Scottish Green Party for the Government's budget. And those discretionary housing payments are obviously in place to support tenants and to assist them in managing the costs which they face. So I assure Lorna Slater of the Government's determination to make progress on the issue of rent controls. That's why we're legislating through the Housing Bill. And with the welcome support of the Scottish Green Party for the budget, we are able to put in place the support through discretionary housing payments, which will be an essential part of our commitment to tenants.
Thank you. Question number 4, Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister whether he will provide an update on the Scottish Government's work to keep the promise in light of the 5th anniversary of it being made.
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Rona Mackay for raising this important question on the 5th anniversary of the promise. Parliament unanimously made the promise and we all have a duty to keep it. I spoke yesterday with care-experienced young people at the University of Glasgow to hear about the challenges they've faced, but also to hear about their hopes for the future. We are making progress in delivering the promise. We've seen a 15.6% reduction in the number of children in care since 2020, over £110 million investment in whole family support, and now nobody under 18 is admitted to a Young Offenders Institute. I assure Rona Mackay and Parliament that I am absolutely committed to delivering the improvements needed, and I welcome the report from the Oversight Board, which is clear that whilst there is more to be done, the promise can be kept by 2030.
Rona Mackay.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. This is clearly a significant announcement and welcome news on the anniversary of the promise. Can I ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government hopes and expects will be achieved through the increased £6 million to the Whole Family Wellbeing Fund provided to Children's Services Planning Partnerships? And what improvements can we expect to see as a result of this funding increase from the SNP Scottish Government?
First Minister.
So, as I indicated in my earlier answer, we've already invested over £110 million through the Whole Family Wellbeing funding programme. This funding transforms how families are supported so they can get the right help at the right time for as long as they need it. This additional £6 million funding that's referred to by Rona Mackay is for Children's Services Planning Partnerships, which will be used to improve support locally in a way that best meets the needs of the families and communities and ensures Scotland can keep the promise. Examples of this work include the provision of community-based family support hubs, services to support pregnant women, holistic support for parents with mental health or substance issues, and welfare rights advice.
Thank you. Ros McCall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Whole Family Wellbeing Fund has underspends right the way across the country, but the Oversight Board report published yesterday was clear in the explicit leadership and drive from the Scottish Government and other bodies to articulate a clear set of principles, outcomes and milestones to ensure the promise is kept by 2030 has been severely lacking. It included over 10 critical shortcomings that needed urgent attention, including workforce shortages, financial instability for care leavers, inadequate focus, fragmented services, lack of coordination, it goes on. It's simply not the case, First Minister, that this Scottish Government lacks the courageous leadership needed to make the decisive actions to meet the promise by 2030.
First Minister.
Well, let me assure Ros McCall that I have every intention of making sure that, working closely with my Minister, Natalie Dawn-Innes, that we will provide all of that necessary focus, leadership and impetus. In the programme for government that was published in September, the whole concept of whole family support was absolutely pivotal to the achievement of the government's highest priorities, which relate to the eradication of child poverty. And what I want to make sure is that the work that we undertake to improve the experience of care-experienced individuals is right at the heart of our agenda on eradicating child poverty and providing the best start in life for children and young people. So let me assure Ros McCall of the absolute determination of the Government to ensure that is the case.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm grateful, Presiding Officer. The Promise Oversight Board report also said that we are halfway between the promise and when we must keep it, but we are not halfway to delivering on the promise. One area in particular is the absence of a stable home, which the report highlights increases families' pressures and increases the likelihood that children will end up in care. There was a devastating report this week that reveals the number of children in temporary accommodation is at a record high. And we in this country are in a dire situation with regard to this. So what action is the Scottish Government going to take with respect to the numbers of children in temporary accommodation, which is a breach of the promise, but it's also a breach of children's human rights to accommodation?
First Minister.
Yeah, I accept the importance of the point that Mr Whitfield puts to me, and the Government is obviously taking steps to reduce the number of children who are living in temporary accommodation. And indeed, across 20 local authority areas, in the statistics to which Mr Whitfield refers, those councils have reduced the number of children in temporary accommodation. But it's not enough. And that's why the Government has committed £768 million to invest in housing expenditure within Scotland for the forthcoming financial year. And increasingly, more of those resources have been applied to tackle void properties, for example, to make sure those properties are available for families to occupy. And in quite a number of local authority areas, that change of priority is already delivering better outcomes, with families having long-term accommodation. But there is a deadly serious point at the heart of the question that Mr Whitfield puts to me, because I can only take the action that Mr Whitfield wants me to take on housing if Parliament approves the budget. And we all committed as a Parliament, every one of us committed to the promise. And we've therefore got to take the steps to make it happen. And we can only take the steps to make it happen if we have the financial investments to do that. So I simply leave the point with Mr Whitfield to reflect on over the week-long recess that lies ahead, that maybe if he wants to turn his rhetoric into reality, he should support the Government's budget at stage 3 and make sure the investment is made in housing. Because if he doesn't, it's just empty rhetoric from the Labour Party.
Question number 5, Douglas Lumsden.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the Court of Session's decision regarding the Rosebank oil field and the Jackdaw gas field.
First Minister.
President Officer, the Government is considering carefully the court rulings announced last week. Decisions on offshore oil and gas licensing and consenting are currently reserved to the United Kingdom Government. We have been consistently clear that the UK Government should approach these decisions on a rigorously evidence-led, case-by-case basis, with robust climate compatibility and energy security being key considerations.
Douglas Lumsden.
Presiding Officer, our North Sea workers are being failed by the Labour Government and are being failed by this devolved SNP Government. The decision on Rosebank and Jackdaw is a hammer blow to the North East and will mean we import more oil and gas instead of using our own resources and supporting our own workers. A poll by True North shows that nearly 3/4 of Scots back the North Sea oil and gas industry. So will the First Minister also back the industry and drop his disastrous presumption against new oil and gas production before more jobs are lost?
First Minister.
President, what I will do is I will do everything in my power to try to secure a just transition for everybody involved. We all realise that we are going to have to make a transition from dependence on fossil fuels, unless, of course, we are going to deny the climate crisis that we are facing. And I, for one, am not going to deny the climate crisis that we face. But equally, I want to do everything I can to support the transition for the workforce in the North East of Scotland, just as I would like to see us in a position to do more to support the workers at Grangemouth who have been served with redundancy notices, and I am deeply concerned by the lack of impetus that we have been able to secure, particularly on projects such as carbon and capture and storage, which would provide such opportunities for the future of Grangemouth. So what the Government will do is we will consider these judgments. We will work with the oil and gas sector to manage the transition that lies ahead, because I want to make sure we have a strong and prosperous future for those involved in oil and gas in Scotland, and a strong and prosperous future for the Scottish economy.
Thank you. Fergus Ewing.
We are in a time of huge international tension and an ever-increasing risk of trade tariffs. The First Minister mentioned energy security. It is not the best way to protect energy security here and in Europe is to produce as much oil and gas as we possibly can, not least because, as the First Minister I hope will know, the Equinor plan for the development of the Rosebank field states that the carbon footprint will be half the level of the existing North Sea average, and given it will be electrification ready, that could reduce to 3 kilograms of carbon per barrel, which is 25 times less than the carbon footprint of fracked gas from the USA and Qatar. So, which is better for the environment, producing our own or helping Donald Trump?
First Minister.
Well, what I'm interested in doing is making sure that we manage the transition to net zero, because we cannot deny the climate crisis that we face. And that will be the position that I adopt and observe, because the science tells me that is the rational position for us to take forward. It will also dictate the approach I take on energy policy and encouraging the move to sustainable energy security by the investments that we make in offshore renewables, again supported by the Government's budget that passed Stage 1 on Tuesday, and also facilitated by outstanding interventions such as that from SGN in methyl, where there is a pilot project to take hydrogen to be used in domestic power systems as a replacement for gas. So there is innovation that Scotland is leading the world about. I'm immensely proud of what our academic institutions and our companies are doing to take forward that agenda, and they will have the full support of the Scottish Government.
Thank you. Question number 6, Jackie Baillie.
To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to address the reported shortage in clinical radiologists, which is projected to rise to 263 fewer posts than needed by 2028.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the work of radiologists is absolutely crucial in effective delivery of a wide range of services, including cancer diagnostics, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the radiologist community across the country for the commitment they take forward on our behalf. Our investment in the radiologist workforce over the last 10 years is evidenced by an almost 25% increase in consultant radiologist numbers. We continue to invest heavily in radiology training, funding 192 specialty training places in clinical radiology, including 78 extra places we have added since 2014, based on modelling of future workforce need. Clinical radiology training programmes, which have filled at 100% in Scotland every year since 2013, enable doctors to train and enter the workforce following completion of training, which takes a minimum of 5 years.
Jackie Baillie.
We know that outsourcing scans is a sticking plaster approach that's favoured by the Scottish Government, but the BMA and the Royal College of Radiologists say that there is a real need to train and recruit more radiologists if we are to have a sustainable service in the long term. Now, the First Minister knows the consequences of the lack of radiologists results in increased waiting times for cancer diagnosis and treatment. The last quarter's performance shows that the 31-day and 62-day target were both missed yet again. That's worse than the previous quarter. The First Minister has been at the heart of this government for the last 18 years. So can he explain to the people of Scotland why cancer waiting times are worse on his watch?
First Minister.
Now, I think it's turning out to be my obligation to try to put some of Jackie Baillie's comments into their proper context. We're treating more patients with cancer on time within both standards compared to the same quarter 10 years ago. 12% more within the 31-day standard and 6% more within the 62-day standard. Now, Jackie Baillie talked about the fact that the 31-day standard had been missed. The target is 95%. And the performance was 94.3%. Now, I accept that is missed. I missed it.
Let's hear the First Minister.
If anyone's interested, remotely interested in hearing my answers, I'm happy to give them. But those levels of performance, I accept that we missed that target of 95%. But I want to reassure members of the public that the overwhelming majority of patients have been treated within the 31-day target. And it's important that Jackie Baillie doesn't come here every week and spread alarm with members of the public when our staff are doing their level best to protect the public.
Thank you. We move to general and constituency supplementaries, and I call Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, 435 workers at the Grangemouth refinery in my Falkirk East constituency were given redundancy notices, and refining will cease at the end of June. Despite statements from the Prime Minister and the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland who promised to, and I quote, step in to save the jobs at the refinery and put hundreds of millions of pounds behind it, the UK Government has instead prioritised 8 sites, none in Scotland, for the likes of sustainable aviation fuel. I understand the need to transition, but the just in just transition has turned into a just wait for the workers' wider cluster and the community. Will the First Minister join me in condemning the UK Government for its lack of action, and will he set out what specific steps the Scottish Government is taking right now to support the workers and to ensure there remains a skills cluster to transition from?
First Minister.
I understand entirely the concerns of Michelle Thompson, who has tenaciously spoke on behalf of her constituents in Grangemouth, and I pay tribute to her for what she has contributed to this debate on their behalf. And I understand her frustration at the lack of an immediate solution, which was promised by the Labour Party at the election. Indeed, Anna Sarwar stood beside me on a Scottish television debate and made this very point, and it has not been fulfilled. Now, when I last met the Prime Minister, I was clear with the Prime Minister on the need to support and retain the highly skilled workforce at Grangemouth. I am becoming increasingly impatient about the fact that there has been no decision taken to award the Acorn carbon capture and storage project to Grangemouth, which I was assured would be the case by the last Conservative Government and has not been taken forward by the Labour Government. So if there is an interest in trying to fulfil the commitments made by the United Kingdom Government to intervene, to act in Grangemouth, I urge the UK Government as a matter of priority to authorise the Acorn carbon capture project and to give certainty to the workers in Grangemouth.
Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The SNP's Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn, lobbied the Scottish Government on behalf of Flotation Energy, a renewables company which was awarded consent for a project. 30 days later, Stephen Flynn received a £30,000 donation from a director of that company. Now, today we found out that behind closed doors, SNP ministers had, and I quote, real concerns about the process in awarding of this contract and questioned whether the assessment had been rigorous enough. The Net Zero Secretary was given the final 217-page document at just before 2 o'clock in the morning, and she signed off on it at just after 9 o'clock in the morning. The secrecy and the lack of transparency is shocking, and something at the heart of this process stinks. Does John Swinney not realise how dodgy this looks?
On matters for which the First Minister has general responsibility.
The concerns that the Cabinet Secretary was raising were about the time taken to reach the decision-making process as a consequence of government scrutiny. And the Minister was expressing her concern that the Government had to speed up its decision-making processes in that respect. And that, of course, has happened as a consequence of the actions taken by ministers in the intervening period. Now, I'm struck by the fact that on the 23rd of April 2024, one of Mr Hoy's colleagues said that consent times are a huge issue for offshore wind farms and called on the Scottish Government to streamline the necessary regulatory and administrative processes and expedite the approval and implementation of offshore wind programmes. Now, those were the words of Douglas Lumsden MSP in the official report of the Scottish Parliament. So I suggest that the Scottish Conservatives decide whether they want to have projects delivered timorously or whether they want to get in the road, because either way, the Conservatives look like they're in their usual muddle today.
Alec Crowley.
Presiding Officer, the Land Reform Scotland Act 2016 was passed overwhelmingly by this Parliament and helped extend community right to buy for compulsory purchase of land or a building for the purpose of sustainable development. In Fife, there is a group of local residents struggling to get a ministerial decision for their Part 5 right to buy application dated the 31st of October 2023. The building they are trying to purchase is in an increasingly derelict state and the delay is causing further harm to this 200-year-old building at the heart of North Queensferry. I can say the recent storm has made that much worse. The residents wish to restore the building to serve the local community, but are struggling to get a response from the community land team. Will the First Minister agree to look into this matter and find out why there has been no progress?
First Minister.
I'm not familiar with the case, but I understand that Shirley Sunville, as a local member, has met with Mary Goujon to discuss this question as the responsible minister. But let me take the point that Mr Rowley puts to me. I understand the community aspiration to acquire the asset and to be able to utilise it for community benefit. I also understand from my own constituents' experience that sometimes these things take longer than they should do. Indeed, I've just been wrestling with the question of things taking too long sometimes. So let me do what I can to help Mr Rowley, because I understand the significance of the point he raises today, and I will write to him with an update as a consequence of my inquiries.
Alton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of news this week that a fatal accident inquiry is to be held into the death of Coatbridge resident Jacqueline McMillan at Monklands Hospital in 2018. My office and I have been supporting the family, who are also my constituencies, particularly Jacqueline's sister Lynn, since this time, and I know how important this announcement is for them in their ongoing search for answers. While I know the First Minister can't comment on the specifics of the case, I wonder if he'd join me in acknowledging the difficult time the family have been through and in calling for the Crown Office and Prosecution Service to keep them fully up to date as the case progresses.
First Minister.
President, I welcome the point made by Mr McGregor, and he obviously acknowledges that I cannot comment on the substance of the case as it is currently live. But I do assure him that the Crown Office have made significant improvements to their engagement with families in recent years, reflected in their Family Liaison Charter, and I fully expect that the family involved in this tragic case will get the support that they require. And if there are any concerns about that issue, I would encourage, well, I know Mr McGregor will raise this faithfully on behalf of his constituents with the Lord Advocate.
Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In this chamber, I have spoken time and time again about the horrors of violence and abuse in our schools. Yesterday, staff from Kirkconnell High School in my region of Eastern Bartonshire went on strike over a culture of abuse and violence from pupils. Violence against pupils and school staff have gotten out of hand, and our schools are no longer safe. The shocking situation is a direct result of the SNP's weakening of Scotland's justice system and a failure to protect pupils and teachers. So when will the First Minister's government finally get the grip of this situation?
First Minister.
Everybody that goes to a school, whether they're a member of staff or a pupil, should be safe. And it's incumbent on every local authority in the country to make sure that our schools are safe. For some children, they will be the safest places they can go to because of the challenges that they face elsewhere in society. And this is a vital priority. As Pam Gossel will know, I hosted a cross-party summit on the 13th of January, which involved her colleague Sharon Dowie, to explore some of the issues about youth violence. And I will always take these questions seriously. But I do not want the impression to be created that our schools should be anything other than safe. And also, I don't want the impression to be created that anything other than the fact that the vast majority of young people across Scotland do not engage in violence, and that they operate and they attend safe and stable schools. If there is an issue in a particular school, let's address that. But let's not characterise every single school in the country in the fashion that Pam Gossel has done so, because it doesn't serve anybody's interests, and it certainly doesn't serve the young people of our country.
Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the 30th of January, Commonwealth Theatre staff, supporters and the wider community were relieved when it was announced that all currently funded organisations would secure significant additional multi-year funding. That relief, though, turned to heartbreak when they were told that wasn't the case. They'd missed out on core funding, the only arts organisation who were previously funded who are now losing support due to, and I'm told,
a technical issue with the supporting evidence they provided being too extensive. Now, to add insult to injury, they also failed to receive any support from the newly created development stream. Creative Scotland deciding that Commonwealth Theatre is not of strategic importance, despite the fantastic new facilities, and they themselves having praised those facilities and the work done by the theatre for decades. So, can I ask the First Minister whether he agrees with Creative Scotland that Commonwealth Theatre is not of strategic importance, and will his government urgently review this devastating funding decision?
First Minister.
So, I'm well aware of this case, and I discussed it with Jamie Hepburn, the local member, in the course of this week. These decisions are taken by Creative Scotland independently of government, and that's what the law requires us to do. So Creative Scotland exercise these decisions against the criteria they've set out. I understand there is to be a meeting next week between the Chief Executive of Creative Scotland and Commonwealth Theatre to consider these issues, because I do recognise the enormous disappointment that will be experienced and appreciated in Cumbernauld, and but Mr Griffin must also accept that there is not parliamentary support for the government intervening in the decision-making of Creative Scotland, because Parliament has determined that Creative Scotland should be able to take these decisions for itself. But I do hope that there is a constructive conversation that can find some way of resolving this issue, because in amongst all of the other decisions that have been taken, the content of the government's budget has given an absolutely colossal boost to culture and the arts in Scotland. It's a real improvement in the funding available, and I'm glad that that's been able to be felt across communities the length and breadth of our country.
And Emma Harper.
Thank you, President Officer. The latest figures have shown Scotland reaching a major milestone, with more than 10,000 patients across Scotland benefiting from Da Vinci robotic-assisted surgery since 2021. I was first introduced to robotic surgery, including early Da Vinci models, when I worked in the operating theatre in Los Angeles in the early 2000s. Can the First Minister advise what assessment the Scottish Government has made of the impact of surgical robots on NHS productivity? And can he say any more about the steps the Scottish Government has taken to support the delivery of robotic-assisted surgery in Scotland?
First Minister.
President, this is obviously having a beneficial effect because there has been the delivery of a number of procedures through this approach. To ensure we've got robust data and to allow us to better identify how robotic-assisted surgery can be used across the National Health Service, we've commissioned Public Health Scotland to audit the experience, and that data will be vital in ensuring we can continue to scale up, drive equitable access and maximise patient benefit.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's point of order. Stephen Kerr.
Presiding Officer, can you advise the Chamber as to whether or not you have been approached by Scottish ministers to make a statement, an urgent statement, on the developing situation at Grangemouth Refinery? Because, frankly, it's just not good enough that Scottish ministers sit in this chamber and engage in a blame game when there's serious work to be done to secure jobs and the local economy in Grangemouth.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I can confirm that I have not been approached, but Mr Kerr will be aware that he can raise this issue with the business manager, and such matters can be addressed by the Parliamentary Bureau. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Elena Whittam, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and public gallery to do so.
Thank you. The next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 15657 in the name of Elena Whittam on report of alcohol use disorder in the justice system. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Elena Whittam to open the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and may I thank colleagues from across the Chamber for supporting my motion, enabling me to bring to the Parliament's attention the recent report published by Scottish Health Action on Alcohol Problems entitled Alcohol Injustice, Possession on People with an Alcohol Use Disorder in the Justice System, and may I also welcome representatives from SHAP to the Chamber today. The play on words within the title of this critical report is in itself a lightning rod that we should all be coalescing around. Alcohol is a recurrent feature within our justice system. The link between alcohol and crime is well understood, and this in turn highlights the injustice that is faced by many when alcohol use disorder impacts on the individual, the family and their community. Inequality is at the heart of this issue, and the human cost is staggering. But it goes wider than this, Deputy Presiding Officer. It impacts on all public services, and the cost to the public purse is considerable. Repeated interaction with the criminal justice system, driven by and exacerbated by alcohol use, creates impacts that ripple right through every area of life. Repeated contact with police and courts, and repeat periods of incarceration, repeat homelessness, social work interventions, loss of employment or employment opportunities, poor health resulting in increased need for NHS interventions, including costly unscheduled care. I believe the case for change set out in the report is clear. The number of people with alcohol use disorders is disproportionately high within our Scottish justice system compared to the population at large. And although we are working hard on it, we still have the highest imprisonment rate within Western Europe. We know 63% of people in prison have an alcohol use disorder, with 31% of those individuals possibly alcohol dependent. And the risk of death from alcohol causes is also 3 times higher in men, and a staggering 9 times higher for women who have been in prison than it is for the rest of the general population. If we consider adverse childhood experiences and trauma, 25% of people in Scottish prisons are care experienced, 47% have experienced physical abuse in childhood, and around a third lived with someone who was a problematic drinker during childhood. Again, inequality and disadvantage is pervasive in the justice system, and I saw this over and over and over again when I worked in frontline homelessness services. If we think in resourcing terms, the overall estimate for the yearly cost of alcohol-specific and alcohol-related offences on public services is between £462.5 million and £991.7 million, with a midpoint of £721.1 million. And it is therefore important to note also that these figures have not been re-estimated since 2007 and 2008, and I think the true figure is likely to be much, much higher. Deputy Presiding Officer, the SHAP report calls for a system that truly integrates health and justice, a system that provides treatment options and community disposals instead of incarceration where appropriate, that offers support at every stage of an individual's journey, from arrest to sentencing and beyond. This isn't just a humane approach, it's an effective one. We know that addressing the root cause of problematic alcohol use through targeted interventions can reduce offending and lead to better outcomes for both individuals and society as a whole. But the reality is that the 2019 Scottish Prisoner Survey showed that only 22% of participants reported that they had the chance to receive treatment for an alcohol use disorder during their sentence. The survey also revealed that 40% of prisoners involved reported being drunk at the time of their offence, and nearly 1/5 of prisoners who took part in the survey were worried about alcohol would be a problem when they got out. But encouragingly, 41% of participants said that if they were offered the help for their alcohol use disorder, both inside and outside of prison, that they would take it. The key recommendations from SHAP outlined in the report are that at each stage of a person's interaction with the justice system, alcohol issues are recognised and properly assessed and acted upon, with key agencies having accountability. Accountability is key. In police custody centres, there should be a standard in place for the identification and treatment of people with an alcohol use disorder for both police and NHS staff. This would include referral to healthcare or addiction services and appropriate tools being used for alcohol use screening and appropriate actions taken. including alcohol brief interventions or arrest referral for alcohol treatment and support. For alcohol brief interventions in justice settings, delivery sits around 29% in prison and 3% in police custody. This urgently needs to rise. Those identified as needing support should be flagged so that their support needs are known throughout their journey in the criminal justice system. This should also help to support the Procurator Fiscal if fulsome information is on the standard prosecution report when looking at suitability for diversion from prosecution. We know that referrals to drug and alcohol specialist treatment in Scottish prisons has fallen in recent years, and I know that work is underway by Public Health Scotland to understand why this is a part of wider work as well that's on reduction to alcohol services in general overall. The Scottish Government is also currently working on a national service specification for alcohol and drugs, and this represents an ideal opportunity to publish a clear specification for justice settings, as well as developing standards for alcohol treatment and support at each stage of the justice system, which will help embed treatment and recovery communities right across the justice sector. Recent broader approaches to justice, like the Public Health Scotland Health and Justice Strategy and the Bail and Release Act, demonstrate a will to change. But the separations of power and the independence of decision-making between the organisations and bodies involved in the justice system can pose a challenge for overall coordination of care and support. We need enforceable standards with clear lines of accountability so that these recommendations are actually implemented and people do not continue to fall through the cracks. Planning for release should happen when someone arrives in custody, so we can ensure that they have been linked in with recovery services and support, housing and welfare provision well up front of release. We should also seek to maximise the role of recovery communities and AA, which can help people to work through these issues. Where attendees have consistent access to meetings, reports suggest reduced cravings, stronger coping strategies and improved engagement with other rehabilitative programmes. Participants who continue AA after release credit it with helping them secure employment, rebuild family relationships and remain sober in the community. The same can be said when people are proactively linked into recovery communities back home. Presiding Officer, when I was a Minister, I was privileged to visit the Glasgow Drug and Alcohol Courts and watch them in action, and I was mightily impressed by the problem-solving attitudes of those sheriffs and their shared desire to drive systems change. I also spoke to other sheriffs right across Scotland who shared the problem-solving ethos, the desire to understand what drives offending and what interventions, what diversions and community justice disposals could deliver better outcomes. This attitude must become the default if we want to sever the link between alcohol and crime. Deputy Presiding Officer, this is not soft justice. This is smart justice. And I look forward to hearing from colleagues across the Chamber today and from the Cabinet Secretary herself, who I know is as passionate about this issue as I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Whittam. I now call Rona Mackay to be followed by Emma Roddick. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very pleased to speak in this important debate, and I thank my colleague Elena Whittam for bringing it to the Chamber. I congratulate Elena's long-standing commitment to tackling the problem of alcohol and drug abuse and thank her for her customary, informative and inspirational opening speech. Alcohol abuse and addiction is a significant and pressing issue within the justice system in Scotland. Indeed, it's disproportionately high. Almost two-thirds, 63% of people in prison have an alcohol use disorder, with almost half of those possibly dependent on alcohol. And risk of death from alcohol causes is 3 times higher in men and 9 times higher for women who've been in prison than for the general population, as Elena Whittam articulated. Presiding Officer, all deaths due to alcohol are a tragedy, but as convener of the cross-party group on women, families and justice, that statistic really concerns me. It's estimated that as many as 90% of women in custody in Scotland have addiction problems, whether alcohol or drugs. It's further estimated that 80% of women in prison have brain damage due to head injuries caused by domestic violence, and a similar number of women suffer mental illness to some degree. Presiding Officer, the issue of whether these women should be in prison at all is for another debate, but it's one I'm certain we should have soon. I submit that prison is entirely the wrong place for women whose addiction and chaotic life experience has led them down the wrong path. I'm grateful to SHAP's report for the research which shows that Of the 12,000 people who had community payback orders imposed in 2021 to 22, only 1% received alcohol treatment as part of their order. I know there can be complex reasons for that, but on the face of it, we must do better. 40% of prisoners reported they were drunk at the time of their offence, and almost 1/5 was worried alcohol misuse would be a problem for them upon release. However, 41% said if offered help for their alcohol use, both inside and outside of prison, they would take it. In addition, people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, an entirely preventable condition, are also overrepresented in the justice system. Turning Point Scotland, an excellent third sector organisation, delivers a range of harm reduction approaches in relation to problematic alcohol use across our services. They believe their programme of harm reduction should be incorporated into the justice system to identify and act on a risk of alcohol-related harm in their setting. So time doesn't allow me to detail their initiatives, but it's well worth having a look at their excellent website. Presiding Officer, people coming into the justice system provides an opportunity to some extent to recognise and crucially to address alcohol use disorders, offering both treatment and support. Alcohol brief interventions mentioned by Elena Whittam are a good example of this approach that could be strengthened through more consistent delivery and by improving options for diversion to appropriate services. So, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, it's abundantly clear that alcohol misuse disorders within the justice system is a significant problem that has been overlooked for too long. Our prisons are overcrowded and hard-working prison staff are dealing with a multitude of problems. A targeted programme of support and treatment for alcohol abuse, which of course includes prevention in wider society where Scotland's drinking culture has been a long-standing problem, should be available to reduce the pressure on our justice system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mackay, and apologies, I was a bit ahead myself. In fact, I will now call Alexander Stewart to be followed by Carol Mockin. Mr Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be able to contribute to this afternoon's debate, and I'd like to thank Elena Whittam for bringing it to the Chamber this afternoon. The issue of alcohol use disorders is one of the issues that interacts with the Scottish system when it comes to justice. And as it's laid out in the motion today, the statistics on this issue include that nearly 2/3 of people in prison have an alcohol use disorder. The issue, however, is one that goes far beyond the mere numbers. Far too much of the current legislative and the problem that are focused with alcohol within our prisons. In reality, alcohol use disorders affect individuals at all stages of the justice system. That includes initial police contact with custody centres, court settings, liaison in divisions and through care. However, when it comes to the prison setting, it is clear that the current approach to alcohol and drugs seems to be having issues. At HMP Glenocal, in my own region of Clackmannanshire, recently there were 35 inmates who were found under the influence of drugs during Christmas Day. And prison staff reportedly have seized issues that cause that problem. The indication that we have that there is an issue is far, far overreaching. So it is only fair that drugs and alcohol can be looked at when we're dealing with prison situations. It is far less than the Scottish Prison Service were forced to introduce a policy that when it deals with influences when it comes to individuals. These are just two examples of the disruption that can be caused within prison, within the wider system. The Scottish Prison Healthcare Network previously published guidance when it was talking about the misuse within prisons and within custody settings. Unfortunately, that guidance is no longer in use, and our prisons are often the worst of the result of that. Presiding Officer, members across this chamber will agree that the further action is needed to tackle this whole attitude when it comes to alcohol and the wider justice system. Today's motion mentions the solutions that are being looked at and created in supporting individuals who require treatment within the justice system. It is disappointing that approaches that are not being looked at, and there's more guidance that may well need to be ascertained from the Cabinet Secretary, and I look forward to hearing from her in summing up. The Scottish Government is certainly looking at and tackling the National Service specific when it comes to alcohol and drugs within treatment centres, and that's vitally important. There could therefore be an opportunity to ensure that the effective standards that are in place within the justice system as a whole. I hope that in summing up, as I say, the Cabinet Secretary will be able to give us an update on the Scottish Government's progress within this process. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, this is a complex issue that requires bold situations. We've heard today about the individuals, and especially men, when it comes to offending, and they're drunk during their offending, and the amount of women who have to suffer from domestic abuse and violence, and that is also alcohol related, and the individuals who are within our custody and within our systems who are suffering. And I think that has a real impact as to what we should be doing today. So in tackling this issue, I hope the Scottish Government is able to follow the advice and evidence that's been taken from other areas about how this is managed, because the justice system needs to be equipped to hard-working and support the hard-working staff with the tools that need them to do the job effectively, to support themselves and to support those who go through the system. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. I now call Cara Mochan to be followed by Emma Roddick. Ms Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I thank Elena Whitham for securing this important debate and congratulate her on her speech, which I think sets out the direction we should all support here in Scotland. So I'm very supportive of the motion and welcome Shap into the gallery. Excessive drinking of alcohol poses a significant public health challenge globally. However, the Scottish culture of high alcohol consumption and binge drinking has created what can only be described as a crisis. And we need to be honest about this if we hope to reverse the current trajectory and help people, families and communities. It is our responsibility here in this place to do things that we can to support those communities. ONS figures released only yesterday revealed that alcohol-specific deaths in Scotland have reached a 15-year high, and that our country continues to have the highest rate of alcohol deaths in the UK. And inequality, as we've heard from Elena, is embedded in Scotland, and so some of these problems with alcohol feel almost built into the life that people are going to have, and we have to be honest about that and seek to change that direction. Whilst rates remain steady compared to 2022, Scotland still has some of the highest rates of alcohol-related harm in Europe. Not only does harmful drinking impact people's physical and mental health, but as we've heard, it also has a profound antisocial impact and can be detrimental to both individual and societal well-being. So it affects us all, so it is all of our responsibility to do something. As we have heard, and why we're here today, there is a strong link between alcohol and criminal behaviour, and the Alcohol Injustice Report we are discussing here today expertly highlights this, providing crucial insight into the extent to which alcohol can fuel violence and criminality and how we can respond to that. The number of people with alcohol use disorders is disproportionately high within the Scottish justice system compared to the rest of the population. We have heard that. A reported 63% of people in prison have an alcohol use disorder, with almost half of those possibly dependent on alcohol. It also highlights findings from the 2019 Scottish Prisoner Survey, which found that 40% of prisoners surveyed reported being drunk at the time of the offence. The link between harmful drinking and criminal behaviour is clear, and this is where I want to emphasise we must work together to not only provide better support for those suffering from alcohol problems, but also work to tackle the root causes of alcohol dependency and alcohol use disorders. It's important that we have that public health approach. By offering people treatment and support to those who come into contact with the criminal justice system, we can do some of that work. We can provide individuals with the opportunity to recognise and address alcohol use disorder. And I've heard a little about the Glasgow Alcohol Court, and I hope to visit at some point. And I hope that some of the positive approaches that we have heard from this, the Cabinet Secretary will agree is very useful. Intervening in this way would not only improve the health and lives of the individuals affected, but has the potential to reduce reoffending rates, thus helping to alleviate the immense pressures that we feel right across Scotland and in the justice system. Economic and social disparities are also prevalent factors when it comes to an individual's choice surrounding alcohol, as I and others have mentioned. And we know that the risk of alcohol-related harm is greater for those most disadvantaged in our society. And I think it's an important point to make that often those are the people that are very hard to support. They don't readily come forward to services, and we have a responsibility to go to them and see what we can provide. And I welcome the steps that the Government have taken to address alcohol harm, such as the minimum unit pricing. But I wonder whether the Cabinet Secretary for Justice today would agree that this is some cross-portfolio working that we need to do, and that I have asked the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health for an update on the delivery of alcohol market reform. And I think if we work together on these issues, we may be able to see beneficial outcomes. I'm aware of time. I'm going to close there and just really thank members for the debate, and particularly Eleanor Witham for securing the important debate today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mocking. And I call Emma Roddick. Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too want to thank Elena Whittam for raising this report in the Parliament. And I know how important this issue is to her and how much work she's done to tackle harmful alcohol and drug use. And I do think the Parliament's going to be poorer for losing her insightful and empathetic contributions. The statistics in the report speak for themselves. Almost 2/3 of people in prison having an alcohol disorder, and the best part of a third possibly being dependent. But so many of them are willing to take help. And that is the important part, because as we've just heard from Carol Mockin, that is not always the case. So that is a huge opportunity that has been presented to us to support these people. Now, there's undoubtedly an issue with stigma that will drive not only addiction, but the severity of addiction for those who are in prison or reintegrating into society afterwards. And I would point out that some of the rhetoric that we just heard during FMQs is very unlikely to help this issue. Trying to make prison as punitive as possible is not going to reduce prison numbers or crime. It is not going to make the lives of victims, families, or anyone any better. As Elena put it, this is not soft justice, this is smart justice. It serves absolutely nobody to keep people stuck in a cycle of addiction and crime when we know what's causing it. And I think we have a lot to learn yet on addictions and the societal impact both ways. How the negative impacts of how people with addictions are treated are felt not just by that person, but by all of us. Failing to support people costs us money, it costs us time, and it costs us fellow members of society who could be more functioning, happier, and active contributors to our communities, rather than just likely to return to prison again once they're released. I was struck by comments from prison officers on my recent visit to HMP Inverness. They said that they really get to know a lot of their prisoners. They get to build trust and they understand and see the cycle that so many people are caught in. And they see how poor treatment and judgment that those they've supported inside often then go on to receive outside, even from those who should be offering them support, makes them far more likely to return to the behaviours and the people that led them to their convictions in the first place. So unable to get that support that they really need, they instead return to the harmful support networks that they're used to, and return to alcohol and drugs, and return to committing more crime. We heard from Elena Whittam that your experiences, your disadvantage and your trauma often seem to write your future for you. And it's really clear from this report that people are suffering something that they don't have control or influence over. But we have that opportunity when people are in the justice system to recognise that high likelihood of them developing the illness and give them prevention and treatment inside. There is no excuse for somebody who's dependent on alcohol in the justice system not having that dependency addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Roddick. I now call on Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance to respond to the debate. Around 7 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I start by paying tribute to Elena Whittam for securing this very important debate this afternoon. And Ms Whittam always brings to every debate that she participates or leads in her insight, her experience and her eloquence in advocating for the causes that she champions. And she's quite correct to talk about the pervasiveness of inequality within our justice system and the people that we seek to serve and rehabilitate for the interests, for the safety of our communities. But we also have to remember that while we must have a real focus on every step and stage of the justice system about what we can do differently to divert people, to support people, to turn their lives around, we also have to be focused on what happens upstream in health and education and other public services, because as Carol Mawkin says, this has to be cross-portfolio. I am, of course, very grateful to all members who have participated in the debate today. It's been very measured, it's been very thoughtful. I do hope we can take the spirit of this debate forward as we continue to wrestle with our high prison population, for example. And Emma Roddick spoke very powerfully about how we need to have a different debate, a mature debate, a debate that focuses ultimately on what will work to help people turn their lives around and make our communities safer. And Rona Mackay, brought forward that fundamental question on our use of custody, where we have a lot of questions to ask, but ultimately answer as a nature. And Alexander Stewart spoke about the importance of standards and the consistency of those standards being applicable across the system. I'm also, I have to say, very grateful to the Scottish Health Action on Alcohol Problems SHAP for what I consider to be a very well thought out position paper. And I would too like to welcome SHAP to Chamber, and also to say that I would be happy to meet with Ms Whittam along with SHAP, and also with Ms Minto if that was of any assistance. I think it is worth repeating the core statistics that Ms Whittam and others have narrated from this very important report, such as that 2/3 of people in prison have an alcohol use disorder. That certainly gives me, as Cabinet Secretary for Justice, a mandate for action. Indeed, when we read that the Scottish Prisoners Survey, as others have outlined, that 41% of prisoners surveyed said they would accept help for their alcohol disorder, yet only 22% say that they have been offered this help, is clear that action is required right across portfolios. And the inequality for the prisoner population, with men 3 times more likely to die as a result of their use of alcohol, but 9 times more likely if you're a woman, speaks to the strength of the action that we have taken around the women in custody strategy, with the establishment of the community custody units, the one in Glasgow and the one in Dundee, and also that additional investment in health that has been made to support the opening of HMP Stirling. Of course, Mr Stewart.
Alexander Stewart.
We've already talked about, and Carol mentioned in her a submission about the number of deaths that we've seen being at a 15-year high, Cabinet Secretary. And it's quite clear that we still have, even so having the minimum pricing that was brought in 7 years ago, we still have an emergency and individuals are slipping through the net. So what do we need to do when we're looking at treatment and rehabilitation for individuals? Because our individuals already said within the report that in custody they would accept some support, but that doesn't seem to be there.
Cabinet Secretary. So I will come on to speak in a little bit more detail about the action within the justice system on this very matter. But the point that Mr Stewart and indeed others have made, that there is no silver bullet. I'm a great advocate for minimum unit pricing and would never detract from it. But there's never one solution. There are always many solutions, and particularly the work that colleagues are taking in and around pursuing that public health approach. And I know that Ms Minto and other health ministers are waiting on some further work that has been done in and around what we can do within our devolved competence around the advertisement of alcohol. It's not an easy solution, that particular issue. But what I want to really convey to Mr Stewart and others is that irrespective of an individual's abode, whether it's in the community or indeed at His Majesty's pleasure, they have the same rights to access to treatment. Our National Health Service does not and should not discriminate against people on the basis of their past life, of what they've done or what they've not done, or indeed where they are housed, whether they are at liberty or whether they are in custody. And that is something that I have had to my very core since I was a prison social worker quite a few decades ago now. But in terms of the action underway, Presiding Officer, can I just touch on some things? I was very proud that one of the last actions that I took when I left drugs policy to become Cabinet Secretary for Justice is that we did update the prison to rehab pathway. There was some important learning undertaken in that work about how we prepare people leaving custody to go into rehabilitation, and we also removed the 12-week limit on a period of rehabilitation. And although the focus on residential rehab, or the renewed focus on residential rehab, came as a result of our drugs deaths crisis, the investment in residential rehab actually benefits more people with an alcohol disorder, and I was very pleased to do that. One of the things that has really changed within our prison system in terms of culture, and it's a real operational change, is the presence of the recovery movement in our prisons. And the work that the Scottish Recovery Consortium has really grown. It started in 2021 in HMP Perth, where I used to work a number of years ago, and they started working with 10 residents in HMP Perth, and that grew to HMPs Edinburgh, Adderwell, Glenorchy, Polmont, and what was then Corton Vale. And now, you know, there is a recovery presence in all prisons, with also the options of mutual aid groups being able to be accessed. And that speaks to the creation and the building of relationships that serves people well in custody, but also prepares them for liberation. But it's important that all of this work, you know, aligns with MAT standards, because yes, access to treatment, access to medicine, to interventions is crucial, but so is that broader holistic support also, whether it's finance, welfare, or psychological. Speaking to the consistency and the cross-government angle to this, one of the pieces of work that I chair, and it's cross-government, there's a ministerial oversight group on prisoner healthcare. And that has been looking at things like the Scottish Prison Service alcohol and drug strategy. It's been looking at the recruitment and retention of band 5 and 6 nurses within the prison system. It's been looking at things like a target operating model for prisoner healthcare, which might sound quite technical and you know, perhaps not the most exciting aspect of policy, but I have to say, if we've really got to get into the nuts and bolts, if you want to see standards, access and consistency. And I would like to pay tribute to the National Prison Care Network as well. I'll just touch very briefly, Presiding Officer, because I'm extremely conscious of time, that the arrest referral work is also expanding. That's about those contactable moments. Groups have been established across most local authority areas now. And also in terms of alcohol and drug courts, I am very supportive of problem-solving courts and how they are tailored to change individual behaviour and monitoring someone's behaviour. There's really strong evidence that supports them. Ultimately, this is the decision of the judiciary and the Scottish courts and tribunal system if they create, you know, specialist divisions within the system. But I will certainly discuss this matter further with the new Chief Executive of the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service and also the new Lord President. And of course, the core of the Sharp report was about that standard approach. Others have spoke of the importance of the national treatment specification for alcohol and drug treatment in Scotland and how that needs to connect to MAT standards. And we will use the national service specification to promote the good practice that already exists in some areas of Scotland and ensure that work is incorporated into standard practice. And the final point that I will absolutely finish on, and it is my final point, Presiding Officer, I do promise, and it is one of accountability. It's something that I speak about often in this chamber because we are accountable to ourselves and to each other as parliamentarian, and services are also accountable to themselves and to other services also. And accountability is not about blame, but accountability is about answers, and it's about actions, and it's about people working together, and it's about proactively seeking to make a difference, to prevent crises becoming catastrophe, and always seeking to proactively take that preventative approach as well as respond to when life goes terribly wrong. And that's what I, and I'm sure everybody in this chamber who's participated in this debate today wants to seek, is to seek that different debate that has different outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate. I suspend this meeting until 2:30 p.m.